Hello. Welcome to the live podcast of Noel McDermott's Wellbeing Show, and I am indeed Noel McDermott. There will come a time when somebody else will present this and present another name, but I am Noel McDermott, and this is my live podcast. It's great tonight. I've got a really good mate back with me, Elizabeth, who we've been hanging out and sort of doing nefarious activities together for a few years now. So I thought I'd get her back on the show, partly because she's just great to have on. It's sort of extraordinary work that Elizabeth does, and also partly because they've got the conference, the latest conference on bereaved through addiction, which is an extraordinary event. I've been to it. I suggest that you go along. It's on Saturday. James will put a link to information from DrugFAM on from their website, and you can just follow that and book a ticket if you want. It's an extraordinary event. Before we get into talking to Elizabeth, just to remind you, this is live podcast. It'd be lovely to have your involvement. As long as you are listening to this in wherever the equivalent of the UK at 9 p.m. on a Wednesday is, because if you call me outside of those times, you'll probably wake me up and I won't be very happy, all right? So if you're anywhere in the world, which is sort of the equivalent of the UK 9 p.m. on a Wednesday, and it's the 6th of October, this is live, and it'd be lovely to hear from you. Outside of that, it wouldn't be lovely to hear from you. But it'd be great. So the way you can get me is to sort of just call. It's +44 7506 319 745. It'd be lovely to hear from you. You can send a WhatsApp message, give me a call. If you've got questions not for me, because I'm just a presenter. I'm really boring. But for Elizabeth and the work that she does. And that's as much as I want to say. And just want to introduce Elizabeth Burton-Philips, who is the founder of an extraordinary charity called DrugFAM that provides support to families and friends who are affected by somebody else's addiction. And that's the range of addictions: alcohol, substances, gambling, etc. And we're going to learn a bit about how the charity came about and why it emerged. Hi, Elizabeth. Welcome back. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Just had my birthday yesterday, which is nice, and had a great evening at the Whitty Theatre in Wokingham, listening to a jazz band, and really enjoyed it with my husband. So that was really good.
Right. Are we allowed to ask which birthday, or is that rude?
Well, it's kind of a combination of 17. Work it out for yourself.
Okay. And are you like the Queen? Do you have more than one, or is it just one?
It's just one. The family make a big deal of ones with naught on the end. So, you know.
It's one of the ones with naught on the end, I take it.
The one with the naught on the end is gone.
Okay. All right. So it's well, happy birthday for yesterday. I hope it,
thank you.
A lovely time. And how have things been? I mean, it's sort of it is actually, since you've been on the show, it's the last time you were on the show, we were in the studio, I think, were we? No, we weren't. We were sort of had just about started the lockdowns, but we hadn't got very far into them because it was you and another guy.
Karen, wasn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And those are the early days, I think, of the first lockdown. And what's it been like since then for you and for the charity, and sort of how you survived during the last 19 months now?
Well, it's been challenging for us because previous to that, we always used to meet physically. Our support groups were Bucks, Oxon based, and whatever work that we did with our family members, whether they were bereaved or whether they affected by a loved one's active addiction, tended to be based at head office or in our different support groups that we had in those areas. Plus we did have one in Peterborough, but all of a sudden COVID came, and we learnt about this new friend called Zoom, who had relations called Teams and Google Teach. And all of a sudden there was the challenge that we all had to learn very quickly how to set up Zoom meetings so that we could reach all these groups. And it's completely changed the reach that we have. Now, for example, a group that I run on a Monday evening for families who are affected by addiction, we have a client that comes in from Malta. We have on a Wednesday evening, the gentleman who runs the group has clients coming in from America. You know, so it's changed the reach, and even to the point where we've had an email from somebody in Kazakhstan this week asking for support.
Yeah. And these support groups, they meet online. What typically what will happen, I suppose?
Well, if it's the one that I run, for example, with my colleague on a Monday evening, technically it was called the Whitney Support Group because it was based in Whitney in Oxfordshire, and it's trained facilitators that are in there, plus a note taker, and it's very much about peer support and sharing the different stories and helping one another. And these groups form very strong supportive relationships, and people are at different levels of their journey, with whether it's a son, a daughter, a husband, very different levels. And obviously they're governed by confidentiality clauses to be member of the group and so on. But they are really, really valuable in the sense that each week everybody knows that they've got a safe place to come to be with others, to talk about something that's very stigmatized, and it's not like talking about, you know, a child that's dying of cancer in Great Ormond Street Hospital, or somebody who's dying of breast cancer, that kind of thing, because of this stigma and prejudice attitude towards the whole topic of addiction.
Do you mind if I ask you a few sort of, if you like, almost devil's advocate questions? I'm trying to imagine somebody tuning into this who sort of saw the words addiction and family support and may ask some questions. I mean, I guess we'll come on to the bereavement work soon. I guess we all understand that if there's a bereavement, we understand that people may need emotional support to process loss. But you know, if I take a devil's advocate position, why does somebody who's a family member of somebody with an addiction need support? Surely all the support should go to the person who's got the addiction and struggling with them. Why help? I mean, surely what sort of problems could a family member have, really?
That's a great question, Noel. Yes. Well, I'll answer that by saying to you that one of our family members in the group on Monday, who has a son in prison, said her son's really cross with her that she's getting help for herself. How dare she join a group and get help for herself? What's her problem? You know, you know, it's him that's banged up, so to speak, and you know, it's getting people to really understand the fallout, the ripple effect on the families, the anxiety that's created, and how you get sucked into being manipulated and often become codependent, etc. And helping our family members to understand that a lot of guilt that they carry, thinking that they caused it, and now they've got to control it, and now they've got to cure it, and it's their addiction. And so it's very important that we are able to work with families to help them look after themselves.
Right. Okay. And do family members understand that they need help?
By the time they reach us on a telephone asking for help, yes.
I guess because
they're pretty damn desperate. Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
And what sort of things are people desperate with? Do you mind? I'm quite interested in following through on this. Obviously I know, and I'm asking these questions to get the answers from you. I know what the answers are, because I've worked clinically in this field, but I think it may be useful if I continue just to tease out of you what are the sort of problems that people come to you, and ideally they'd come before they're desperate, but that's maybe another conversation. Maybe we'll go into that later. But when they wash up the flotsam and jetsam of the families affected by all these addictions, what sort of problems are they telling you that they have at that point?
Well, for example, it might be that a mother or a father has discovered out of the blue that their son or daughter has been using drugs, and that's perhaps been going on for 3 or 4 years, and they are totally shocked and they don't know what to do. And then you might have another person another family member who might have 2 or 3 children, adults, teenagers using, some in addiction, and they're very desperate to talk to other people, to be in a safe space with other people, and to learn how they can actually, in the first instance, cure their addict. But they come to realize that they can't cure their addict. I think that comes with a sort of nurture versus nature thing, doesn't it? That they want to, particularly the mums, they want to mend it all, fix it all like a broken leg. And it doesn't happen like that. So we hear, and what we see happening in these groups we see people slowly, the mums and the dads, slowly the pennies beginning to drop, that it isn't good to enable, and it isn't good to blame yourself. And what's important is to become resilient and to become strong, and to know how to deal with the situation that they could get sucked into. And for some, it's also very emotional and very sad, because some have cut off any contact with their loved one. And that's hard emotionally, not to have contact. And it's supporting them in the decision that they've made, whilst they know that person is using, to make a decision for themselves. It's not something we would say you've got to do, but they come to make that decision themselves, that enough is enough, and they have to look after themselves and not allow and obsess themselves and obsess over in their head what's going on in husband, son or daughter's life.
I mean, it sounds like people are turning up with a great deal of shame about the situation that they're in, both imagined shame about their own responsibility for whatever's going on, but also shame in terms of the way they experience the world and what they might imagine other worlds fusing. Because it isn't a pleasant world when it comes to addicts. And maybe understandably, people can get quite annoyed about addicts and see them as antisocial, etc., etc. Some people don't like that term. I can imagine some people who listen to me now going, "That's not a very nice word, Noel." Well,
yeah.
Okay, but it's a word, and we're going to continue using it. But in some places, it is not thought of as a pleasant word. And I'm getting from you that the people who turn up for support from your organisation may be carrying a lot of shame around a whole bunch of stuff.
Yes, I would agree with you to some extent. Some of them are, but some of them are actually quite courageous and will stand firm and not be ashamed to tell people that their son or daughter or partner is an alcoholic, is a drug addict. Because it's only by breaking the stigma and speaking out, that you can do something about it. So it's a bit of a mixture. You know, those that come in and I remember one lady saying that she wanted to come in and be part of a group where she could keep it all under wraps with us. And you know, one of the other ladies that's very wise, who's got long time experience of alcoholism in her family, was saying, you know, you'll come to a point where perhaps you don't feel you need to keep it under wraps with us, and you'll feel confident to speak out about it, because this is a health matter, and let's recognize that it is a health matter. And of course, sadly, you've got that group of people in society who take the view, well, it's their own bloody fault. You know, they chose to do it. They brought it on themselves. And, you know, if they kill themselves, well, that's their fault. You know.
We're going to come to that attitude a bit later. I want to remember, because death is part of this dangerous lifestyle around, and it is a dangerous, risky lifestyle. And you do some very specialised work around that as well, around the experience of death. That's what the conference on Saturday is about, which James has, I know, put a link out to, or during the broadcast. So people can go and check that out at your leisure. But again, I want to highlight the importance of sort of turning up on Saturday and learning something about this. There's lots of resources as well on the DrugFAM website. And again, James is ready to go with another link, which will take you straight to the homepage of DrugFAM. And the reason why I want that link out is to sort of push the idea that you can sort of financially help DrugFAM at the moment. Like all charities, it survives simply on your help, folks. There's often, I had this, I'm going to tell you this story. I was driving back from visiting somebody today, and I got to the underpass on Euston Road. People who live in London know that I was coming east along, heading up towards King's Cross, and the underpass there has become a favourite haunt of various people who are asking for money and sort of walk up to the car, walks beside your car. I did this evening give somebody some money. And people have started living under there, and clearly some people are there because they have addiction issues, without a doubt. So people are there on the streets, and I guess people sort of have this dilemma, don't they, about how do I help, which is why I'm raising the issue. I mean, this evening I decided to give somebody some cash. That was a personal choice this evening. Most of the time I don't really see myself, but if people are getting moved and sort of by the stories and the conversation we're having, you know, a very ethical way, if you like, of helping that situation is by donating to charities like DrugFAM, which is why I'm bringing this subject up. Slightly less hit and miss than giving somebody some money on the streets. That there's some very, very thought through support services that DrugFAM offer. And I'm going to say this as well, because I know this for a fact, that services for families are minuscule in comparison to services for addicts.
Yeah, that's the truth.
It's almost non-existent. And so the extraordinary work that DrugFAM does really needs to be understood and really needs to be supported. So that's my impression of, what was his name, the Irish bloke who set up what was that, charity concert? Just give me your bloody money. What was his name?
Oh gosh,
Live Aid.
Live Aid, yes, yeah. Bob Geldof.
Bob Geldof, and I remember one thing I remember from that day was him just going, "All right, shut up, just give me your bloody money." That's my Bob Geldof moment. Give me your bloody money, which I'm happy to do on part of DrugFAM. Are you somebody, Elizabeth, who, you know, are you just some middle-class do-gooder with no real world experience of this stuff? Have any experience of this?
That's a really interesting question. I've got lived experience of it. I don't see myself as a middle class do-gooder. If anything, I'm known as gangster granny, so watch out. I'd much sooner be gangster granny than some middle class do-gooder.
Tell me your story. Tell us your story, Elizabeth.
Okay. So my background is in teaching, and I gave birth before I'm just trying to think. I was actually, when I was teaching in my early years, gave birth to identical twins, and I just will never forget going into hospital at 38 weeks pregnant, and there was panic going on. And
you wouldn't have known you had twins, would you?
No.
And the ultrasounds.
That's it, thinking gone all the way through a pregnancy, and nobody told me I was having twins. How can that happen? So there's a bit of panic as they said, "Oh, we've got something to tell you." And I thought, oh my God, this is bad news.
After birth.
Yes. They were going to tell me that, there's a stillbirth or something, but along came these identical twins, Nicholas and Simon, and my husband said, I think I'm going to the pub.
Great.
So, and that was 45 years ago. It was exciting, actually, because I joined something called TAMBA, which is Twins and Multiple Births Association. I still don't know whether it exists. Met other mothers, and I thought, I'm okay, because I've had twins, and I met people who'd had quads and triplets, and whether they'd had them by surprise or not, I have no idea. But it was a good club to belong to, where you had that.
James will check if they're still going. Actually, you can sort of Google them for us, James. And maybe...
Yes, I certainly recommend them. Recommend it. Great association to belong to. So so there I am in hospital with these babies. Buy one get one free, which is what I really see it as. And thinking, oh hell, what am I going to do now? This is difficult. I don't know what to do, and it was so exciting. We decided to name them after my father, who was Stephen Anthony. So their middle names, one twin is Simon Anthony, and the other one is Nicholas Stephen. And out of respect for my father, bless him, who only got to know them for a few years, because he had been captured by the Japanese in Burma and had spent a lot of time in a prisoner of war camp and so on. So so they've got their middle names. So I'm very passionate to talk to my grandchildren now about life in the war and the legacy left by my dad. But going back to Nicholas and Simon, they were close. They had a language of their own, a communication of their own. My relationship with them was really great, as was their late father, who passed away this year with sadly with diabetes. And they were fun, really fun, until they found the drug scene. And then things changed, and that was something that I look back on my teaching years.
So hang on a minute, you're literally a little old lady sitting in twin set pearls. You literally got twin set and pearls on, do you realise that? And almost a blue rings. telling me you're a teacher. Right, and so I presume you know something about taking care of children. I presume you understand about attachment, ability, and boundaries and good nutrition and all this sort of stuff. You do all of this stuff, and I can see that you're kind and fun and loving, and I'm sure you were with your boys growing up. Yeah. Yeah, stable. And they both turned into addicts. I mean, really? Because
really.
Aren't addicts somehow, aren't they the product of dreadful parents and awful parenting and backgrounds? And guess not in your case, right?
Absolutely not in my case. And that we all know that nice people take drugs. We don't have to be a criminal as such. Nice people do take drugs. It's just unfortunately the impact that it has on the family if it all becomes out of control. And often there's a lot of secrecy involved when it first happens. And certainly those friends that we continue to have contact with, that were friends with the twins in their teenage years, were doing the same, and they will have this little pact between them. We don't tell mum and dad that we're doing the odd spliff. We don't tell anybody what we're up to if we take the odd pill, because we know we shouldn't be, but they don't need to know because we'll be fine. And it's all a bit of a laugh. And the interesting thing was that when I was teaching and I was in the classroom, I was actually teaching what I called textbook education about smoking in the first instance, and then drugs. And little did I realize that it was actually happening in my own family.
And to both your twins, I mean, what was that like when you just found out that they were both using? And then at that point, it progressed to quite serious, I guess.
Yes, it did. It progressed to late teens, early 20s. Somebody offered them something called a heroin spliff.
Yeah.
And they took that risk, that action led to very serious consequences.
The marijuana spliff that had been spiked with some heroin powder or something like that?
Yes, something like that. And they knew.
Yeah, I mean, they weren't unaware of it.
Yes, I mean, the person
somebody had added heroin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, somebody said to them, well, if you really want to get high, try one of these, it's a heroin spliff. And for me, my naivety about the whole drug taking world was I knew of cannabis then, but I didn't associate heroin going into a spliff, that kind of thing. It was incredibly naive, because the lifestyle that I led did not involve anybody else using drugs in the family, also, I thought. And immediately you're thinking, whoops, if people find out at work that I've got twin boys who are on heroin, what are the governors going to say? What's the head teacher going to say? What are the parents going to say? What are the pupils going to say because of this stigma? And, that's one thing that I always say when I'm speaking in schools to parents now. It's very important to get your kids to talk to you, to engage with you, and for you to do likewise and raise levels of awareness about the dangers of drugs and how easily it is to become addicted.
Yeah.
Have the conversation, not the confrontation.
Yeah. And so you discovered, what age were they when you sort of found out? How did you find out that they were sort of using, quite seriously using at that point, I guess?
I would say they were about 18, 19, and behavior was changing. I suspected there was something going on because there was deceitfulness and money going missing, and excuses for behavior which, as twins, they knew that if they told me that they were both in trouble, they thought I would be completely devastated. So they made a decision to say, that only one of them was in trouble, and the other one was fine. The other one actually had a girlfriend who was also using heroin, and that was devastating enough to hear your child come to you and roll their sleeves up and say, "Mum, I've got something to tell you. Mum, I'm a heroin addict." You don't forget that. And then I said, "What about your brother?" "Oh, he's fine. He's fine. He's got it. He's fine," because they were just protecting me from knowledge of the real truth.
Yeah.
And I believed that at the time.
Yeah. And then how did it progress, and where did you end up?
Well, we ended up in a situation where eventually my husband said to me, "You have to make a choice. It's got so bad because of loans that were taken out to pay off drug dealers." And he said, it's either me or the boys. Make a choice. And I found it very difficult to ask them to leave and to not be part of my life until they could take responsibility for their recovery, because like so many family members, we fell into the trap of thinking, if you pay off drug dealers, if you do this, if you rescue them, if you save them, you can sort it all out, and my mentality at the time was very much about, well, I'm their mum and I can sort this out. And I couldn't. And it led to eventually to the knock on the door that nobody wants to have. And mentally, I had actually prepared myself for both of them dying, because they had deteriorated so badly that when the knock on the door came, I thought it was going to be they both had died, but it was, "I'm sorry, but your son Nicholas has died, and it's an overdose suicide, and Simon had found him."
Yeah.
And that was at the age of 27. I think there's a club called the 27 Club, isn't there, for those people who die, rich and famous, poor. The 27 Club, people who die from addiction.
Yeah, it's dreadful. Dreadful. So I can't begin to imagine how unbearable it was. And one twin being found by his twin brother, who's, I happen to know the twin that survived. I've met him. He's an extraordinary guy, and from that place to where he is now is in and of itself just quite an amazing story. But it's a story he keeps to himself, but I sort of very much admire the guy, where he is now in his life, very successful, family, and just a really good guy as well. I mean, it's such a beautiful story. And that experience led to you setting up the charity, I think, wasn't it?
Yes, it led me to doing two things, really. I think that in 2004, when that message was delivered, you are dealing with the grief of losing one twin who is identical. So you look at the other twin with relief that he hasn't passed away, and you think, how are you going to move forward with this? What are you going to do with your life? Because Simon had lost his right arm, in the sense of his twin Nick had gone, and I was no longer a mother, and the family no longer had these lovely twins. And that was extremely challenging emotionally, trying to process it, because during all that time that it had gone on, really in teenage years until 27, and a lot of it had been hidden until the heroin spliff had been used, and then which led to injecting and chasing the dragon and all sorts of sad, tragic behavior. There was no support for me.
Yeah.
Everywhere I phoned up, it was all about the support for the addict.
Yeah.
And I remember an organisation in Berkshire knocking on their doors, and them actually being, I think they've closed now, but them actually being quite, well, you know, why are you here? You know, we're only here to deal with your son or your daughter, or who, you know, whoever it is. Why are you here? And I think it was the realization that to help myself to move forward as a bereaved mum, that I had to look to see if there was something I could do to help other families, so that no mum, no dad, no grandparents go through this kind of experience alone, and that there are people there that they can talk to. Whether it is active use of drugs, I think if you don't want to use the word addiction, I think we call them substance users or drinkers. But
I'm old-fashioned. I'll stick with addict if that's all right.
All right. Okay. So
being an addict in recovery, I'm allowed to say that sort of stuff.
Okay.
Just before somebody jumps down my throat, I identify with that. That's fine. Yeah. If you don't identify with it, that's up to you. It's fine.
Yeah, but it was just, you know, going back all those years, I just remember feeling incredibly isolated and incredibly embarrassed. And what are people going to think of me, you know, when they find out that this woman, this teacher, this professional has got two, not just one, but two boys who are addicts, and now one is dead. Yeah. What sort of mother's that?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the sad fact is that, you know, a family member now discovers that their child or their husband or their partner is using, would still find it difficult to find support. And there's a double-edged sword that's gone on with the lockdown, because I think the charity was forced into going online because that was the only way to survive, like a lot of organisations.
Yes.
And that has meant an exponential growth.
Yeah.
And so whilst the pandemic is not something that one would have welcomed, it has brought about certain changes that are welcome.
Yeah.
Such as being able to get out there and be more available to support people. Not without complications, I know, because there are some issues for family members. And let's maybe talk about that a little bit in a moment. So I just want to sort of finish off the story. I mean, what strikes me about your story, Elizabeth, I remember when I first met you and you told me about, Mum, can you lend me 20 quid? And it's funny that, you know, I stopped to give somebody some money out the car window this evening, and because I was coming to interview Elizabeth, who's written a fantastic book and produced a superb play called Mum, Can You Lend Me 20 Quid, which anybody who is the family member of an addict absolutely knows what you mean by that.
Yeah.
Right. And I did it on the way over. It's like, but it's okay. It's no problem. I gave somebody a tenner because I suppose because I was coming to have a chat with you, and that was in my mind, wasn't it? You know, so. But you wrote this book about the experience, Mum, Can You Lend Me 20 Quid? And Mum, Can You Lend Me 20 Quid is because your sons were tapping you for money all the time.
Yeah, absolutely tapping me. And it was at that time, you know, Mum, Can You Lend Me 20 Quid? And in the early stages, before I knew what the 20 quid was for, I was only too happy. But you know, when you're going behind your husband's back and taking out £25,000 loan to pay off drug dealers, that's not funny. And then you suddenly realise,
an identification, but that's like, wow,
yeah, you suddenly realise, whoops, actually, my behaviour is mirroring their behaviour, and you don't realise it. You try to rescue by paying off drug dealers who are pretty unsavoury people.
I was going to say, it's pretty frightening when if you owe 25 grand to a drug dealer, they're not known for being pleasant people who just, you can't, don't worry, you can't afford it. Don't worry about it, Elizabeth, that's fine. We'll write it off. That's not the way it works, is it? So your kids...
No, it's we'll burn your house down and
there's genuine threats, and your kids turn up genuinely terrified. Because they know that what's going to happen. It's an impossible situation, I think. So anybody who's listening who finds themselves, I mean, this term enabling and all that sort of stuff, they're very harsh terms, I think, sometimes for what people do is they just try to survive stuff without the appropriate skills and support.
Yeah.
Because the support isn't really there, which is the point you made. You asked for help and people just looked at you blankly. So you created help from it. So you wrote the book, you did the play, and then you set up the charity as well, didn't you?
Yes, the book came first, and that was really, I was driven from the heart, really, to do something in Nicholas's memory. And it was just by chance that I had the opportunity to be given a publishing deal, because it was a mum that wasn't famous, just speaking for ordinary mums and dads. And I think it was Pete Doherty's mum, maybe, that at the time had written a book. And because she was more famous, they were much more interested in, if you like, the ordinary woman in the street. Publishers, The Ordinary Family. And I found, working closely with Simon on that book, that we were able to expose the truth, the truth, the real truth, and nothing but the truth about the story of happiness that began with the birth of the twins, that led to the tragedy, that then led to, hang on a minute, this is a life that is worth talking about. This is my son's life. And it's other people also are going through this similar experience and probably hiding it and grieving and having what I call, I think it's sort of a living loss when they're actually on addiction, in addiction, to that final loss when they're, you're going visiting them in a coffin in a...
Absolutely. I mean, there's 1,000 small deaths that happen before the actual death. Clinically, addiction is often called parasuicide behavior. So it's not suicide, but it is, because it's such high risk and it's so damaging to the individual. The book is available, and again, it'll be on the front page of the website, right, on the landing page, and people can buy that book.
Yeah, I think it's you can see it under the section on Meet Our Founder or something like that. It's certainly there. But
James, if you can find that and put that link.
It's available on Amazon as well.
And all the profits go towards supporting the charity rather than lining your pockets so you can go off to Barbados or something.
Yes, absolutely. Well, all these years on, there are many profits, but it's amazing that it's still selling. And actually it did really well in 2017 because it was updated at the request of the publishers, because so much had happened between the original book coming out in 2006 2007 that it needed to kind of be updated to include the charity.
And also I think it'll be more relevant now, because I know the figures. Substance misuse, alcohol misuse, gambling, problematic gambling have all gone through the roof. I mean, the alcohol-related deaths have doubled, I think, during the pandemic, something like that. It's insane.
Yes.
So it's more relevant now, and people really need to read this stuff. And I think the value of lived experience stories are that it's easier to identify with, because it's the everyday story that, and it also removes the shame and the stigma. Because and so in and of itself, reading the book is a very therapeutic event, I think, for people.
Yes, I certainly found it really helped me with good counselling as well. Very good counselling. It helped me to process the grief, which any loss is always very sad in families, whether it's, because people get older or because there's been a car crash or a very nasty cancer or something like that. Any loss.
Well, coronavirus has been a lot.
Or coronavirus, yes. And for some, you are able to prepare for the passing of somebody if you know that they've got cancer and that kind of thing. But in the world of addiction, often the loss is very traumatically, but it happens in some sort of traumatic way that really, when the police have to deliver that message to the family members, and how it's delivered is very important as well. It sets off a spiral of emotions that can take a long time to come to terms with, and some people don't.
1 second. The reason I'm raising the whole thing about people who've died through coronavirus is that a lot of people now understand that because people died of a serious infectious illness, the ability to go through to burials and ceremonies like that were removed, and people often had to die alone on a ward without physical contact. And so I guess now it's more generally understood that these grieving things that we have in place, such as being able to be with somebody, if possible, being able to gather together for a cremation or a burial, all these rituals and rites that we go through as part of the grieving process are very important in helping us process the experience. And when they're removed, like they were during the pandemic, people really struggled with these losses. Yeah,
absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I mean, the people that
what I would say, and I wonder what you think about this, what I would say is that sense of not being able to grieve openly and being held in a community that understands it is an experience that the family members of those bereaved through addiction really understand, because that's what happens when a loved one dies from addiction, is that the world somehow tells you that grieving them is not allowed. Is that correct, do you think?
I think it is. I think it is. The bereaved people, bereaved family members that have turned to us during the pandemic, and there's been a lot throughout all of 2020 and continuing now in 2021. Not only have they got to cope with the emotion of losing that family member, be it a father from alcoholism or a mother from drug addiction, but the whole issue of the funeral and so on, and not being able to have that in the traditional way where numerous people can turn up, has made it even more difficult.
And also often I think what happens, I have a memory, having talked to you and other people who've lost a loved one to death through addiction, either through suicide or through overdose. I remember, because the response of the professionals in the field, as it were, the police, the coroners, is often incredibly unsympathetic.
Yes.
And I remember, I'm old enough to remember when AIDS first happened, for example. Lots of my friends died. And I remember being around a friend's flat after he died and arranging for the body to be collected for the coroner and stuff like that, and they just refused to touch his body because it was AIDS and they were afraid and stuff like that, and we were required to wrap my friend up in some bedding so they didn't have to have physical. And I was like, you know, that would never have happened with anybody else. And it's almost like there are certain things that happen in bereavement around addiction where people can behave in incredibly unkind ways.
Yes, it is very true. There's huge, as I say, there's huge compassion, and rightly so, for those who die of cancer, or, you know, somebody who's, you know, killed in a car crash. Rightly so, huge compassion. But it's a different world. I think that DrugFAM has made huge strides in tearing down that stigma and the attitude and the prejudice, so that people know that they've got somewhere to turn and not to be judged and not to be made to feel that they are unworthy in their grief.
I mean, I have to say, I just want to remind people that you can ask Elizabeth questions. You've got my number. I remind you of it: +44 7506 319 745. You can call, drop me a WhatsApp, etc. if you have any questions or thoughts you want to share. That to one side. The one of the things that's we say one of the things about human culture, if you talk to a certain form of anthropologists, people who studies the growth of human culture, one of the ways you can know when humanness started is by grave rituals, literally.
Yes.
People started to put things around graves and remember and mourn
Yes.
the loss of somebody, rather than it's just somebody in the herd that falls over and dies and the rest of the herd goes on. And so it's the emotional attachments are what hurt when somebody dies. It's the sudden of those. But that if we go back in time, we often identify the beginnings of human culture around those mourning and grief rituals. It's because we'd reached the point in our evolutionary growth where it hurt when we lost somebody, and we wanted to do something about that hurt.
Yeah. And
it's extraordinary to me that that is that very if anything is natural, what do they say? The two things you can't avoid are death and taxes, right? Born and we die. These things have been around since the beginning of human culture. Grieving has been around, and to deny the right to grieve, especially somebody that you love where there's difficult complications around. We all know that the more complicated the relationship to somebody, the more difficult it is anyway to grieve them and let them go. But to deny the right to the living that they are allowed to grieve seems to me shocking and awful.
Yes, I would agree.
It's
entirely
an awful thing to do to people. And I guess it's that motivation that led to the need, not just for these wonderful support groups for families and friends of addicts, but also for the amazing conference that happens every year, which is going to happen on Saturday. So tell us about, I mean, it's the world I live in, where I'm celebrating things like, there's going to be this conference about people dying through suicides and overdose. Isn't that amazing? I'm like, people must think there's something wrong with me. But it is extraordinary that this thing exists. I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary, because I think it is putting a stake in the ground and saying, no, this is a human experience, a dreadful human experience. Any loss is a dreadful experience, and we need to value that humanness, because it's too easy to dehumanize people who are addicts or on the margins of society. There's always people who love them. That's a fact. And so
Yes.
what does this bereavement conference do for people who've never been to a bereavement conference?
Okay.
What do you mean go along to a bereavement? What?
Yes, that's right. It sounds, what are you doing today? Well, I'm going to bereavement
I'm going
conference.
to talk
What?
about
Yeah. Normally in the real world, before COVID, we had 11 years of physical conferences where incredibly brave people shared their stories about how they'd come through very, very difficult times. One lady in particular, I remember, shared the story, I think in 2019, of losing 3 brothers to addiction. And I found myself being almost, you've only lost a son, for God's sake. This woman's lost 3, and she's gone on to train to be a counsellor, and is now looking actually to become a volunteer with us as well, which is absolutely wonderful. So it brings together people who have spirit, who have courage. We have one lady who spoke last year, actually, who wrote a book called Tenacity, about her experience of losing her son, and she co-wrote that with 2 other ladies who were writing about the loss of their brother. So it's the bringing together of people who need to be physically present to share stories, to grieve together, to laugh together, to remember, and to hang on to the fact that that person's life is worth talking about. That person was very ill and has died in sometimes very, very traumatic circumstances. We have 2 clients who've lost relatives because they've been murdered by drug dealers. So, it ranges from that kind of experience, where they have to go to the courts when these people are caught and sentenced, and it's very, very tough for them, but they courageously have come together each year we've had different themes about bereavement, and this year our title is Lockdown, Volume and Loss.
Yeah.
And we're bringing together some very remarkable people.
So I get the lockdown bit. What's the volume bit?
The volume bit is really about the amount of bereavements that have happened, that have come, where people have turned to us, usually through a telephone call or an email, where they've said, my son, my mother, my sister, my brother has died during lockdown. They've overdosed. They've died by suicide. As I say, sadly one family whose loved one was murdered, and we've just seen a spike in the losses that we're dealing with, and in the phone calls that we have. I think I'm talking to the chief exec, and I think that numbers were 3,000 in terms of people contacting us for just active addiction, and on top of that, significant amount of bereaved family members. And I do know that it is significant in numbers, because the lady that I work closely with, who came to us from being a director of Samaritans, came to us originally as a volunteer, now works closely with me as a bereavement support worker. And we have a system where I will write to the bereaved family members personally and send them some literature. We have our own Bereaved by Addiction handbook, send them some literature that they might be ready to look at. Because at some point when they're ready, we get people ringing in emailing in saying, you know, my son died, my sister died last Friday, and the funeral's in 2 weeks' time. I need some help. Can you help me understand the mess? As opposed to somebody who might have lost somebody 18 months ago at the start of lockdown, who would be coming to the conference, who is saying, I feel emotionally ready. You've got to be sensitive towards, you know, how you reach out to people. But it is very important for me as a bereaved mother to communicate with all our bereaved families, and so on.
And that's this Saturday, folks. We do need to finish there. It always is like this, Elizabeth. You know we run out of time very quickly. Yes. Unfortunately. If I go on any longer, I get told off by my producer for making him work harder because he has to edit for when it's shared other places. So Saturday, the conference is taking place at 10 a.m. Look at our links, folks, and you can go and join in. Look at our links, you can buy the book, and also look at our links and you can see more about what DrugFAM does. It's been awesome to have you with me here again.
Thanks, Noel.
And we're going to have to finish there now quickly, folks. So you stay with me, Elizabeth, and I'll just say goodbye to everybody else. I'll catch up with you next week with another guest who I've got no idea who it is, but there you go. It'll be a guest. It'll be another person. They'll be amazing. And look forward to seeing you all next Wednesday. So bye-bye for now.